For this next one, tutorial 22, we're going to take a look at the tube teleporting. So if you just go to your scenes inside of your project tab, just scroll down to the tutorial number 22. If you double click on this one, it's going to open up this scene for us. Inside of the hierarchy, we have items. The item that we're going to take a look at is the prefab item tube. If you notice when we click on the prefab item 2, just to make sure we understand what we have as a setup, the first one, the game object here, this is actually going to hold our box collider. The box collider is going to be the larger one you see right here, actually just providing a collision around the object itself, allowing the player to move up against it and jump on top of it. Inside of this one, we have our tube portal. This is going to be the one that holds our script, as well as the trigger box for the player character. This is a little bit smaller. That way, we can kind of make sure that the player has to be directly on top of the tube and closer towards center. If you ever find that the character has the ability to move a little bit too far to the left or the right, you can always scale this one a little even skinnier, just to reinforce the fact the player has to be more centered towards the object here. For this one though, if you go over to your if you have this one selected to Portal 1, just go over to this one and you'll see the script component. Double click on it to open it up. Alright, once it's open, we'll go ahead and start writing in the code to make this thing work. The basic idea, remember, behind this is that we want to be able to jump on top. We want to be able to, while over the trigger box here, we want to be able to push down on our joystick or keyboard and have it so that it goes from one portal spot, moves the character down into the tube, and then moves the character over to the other one, pushes them up, and sets them on top. Alright, so we'll go ahead and, with that type of idea, we'll go ahead and start in on the script here. So we'll start off with just saying this is going to be our spawn tube point. And again, place in the basics for it. Alright, so for a basic description here, we'll just go over with like what we basically were just talking about. It'll be able to provide the porting from one tube to another. Alright, and basic instructions, our idea behind this is that what we'll probably need is to drag the tube portal. We'll provide a variable so that we can just drag this portal to another portal spot, and that's going to allow us to actually go into it, and then if we go into it, it's just going to say which one do I go to. It'll look for that other game object to go to, and that'll give us our position, rotation, placement as well. So instructions, basically, we're just going to say that the inspector is going to need an audio file for it, for the sound, and then we'll need the transform location. So we'll say inspector needs an audio file for the tube noise, tube sound, and the transform for the basic location of the next spot. Alright. So starting with this one, the main set is going to be a set. We'll use basically like a set of variables, but also we don't really need an update function. I'm actually just going to use an onTrigger stay. That way, as long as the player is over this one, it's going to allow us to also move the player down inside of the stay trigger area and also up into it as well. Now, we could approach it several different ways, but we're going to do this one so that we can see a different way to set it up. So let's go ahead and get started with some of our variables here. We'll go ahead and do one called time to port, and this one we'll set up our comments at the same time here. We'll do a float, and we'll set it to start off at a 2.0. We'll see how it works once we get going with it. But this is going to be the time to port. Basically, it's going to be a wait in seconds, and it'll be between the tubes. So typically, if you're thinking about like the basic Mario game type, is that when you go down, there's that little bit of wait time between the tubes when he's traveling. So we'll allow that to be actually adjusted in the inspector. Alright, and let's go ahead and make another one. This will be our tube portal 2. So this is basically the target, if you want to call it a target. And all we're going to get from it is going to be its transform. So again, this will be the position, location for the tube. Alright, and then we have a sound that we're going to need, so we'll just call this one sound tube. And if you're trying to go for generic names, you could easily take these out and not actually have them like having the name tube on it, but it could just be a sound, audio clip or audio file that you actually want as shown in the inspector. So we'll do audio clip here. Alright, so this will be the audio file for the tube porting. Okay, and then we'll do a couple of private variables just so we can use them in here. We'll do the play sound. This is going to be just saying whether or not we can play the sound. We'll do a true-false statement on it. And, actually, let's not even do, let's see. Actually, let's not even worry about the play sound one. We'll just call that up directly inside there. So we'll just do the sound tube, and then we'll do a couple other ones for private variables. Let's do the ability for the player to move up and move down when they go into the tubes. We're going to go ahead and just set those to some true-false statements here. So we'll say that the private variable, and let's just call this one move down. And we'll go ahead and start off by setting it to false. And this is going to be the toggle for the player to move down the tube. Alright, and let's do another one here for that. Oops. So it'll be to move up. And we'll set that one to false as well. There we go. So we have two private variables, move down, move up. This again allows us to set when the player is actually moving down or moving up, and then we can have code providing the player to be able to translate up, translate down. Alright, so our basic function that we're going to use for this, we're going to use the onTriggerStay. And we'll use our standard other collider for it. Inside the function, this is going to be where we set up all of our code. This is going to basically control, again, it's going to check for whether the player is over it, pushing down, and whether the player is actually going up and going down on this part. Alright, so let's go ahead and get started with this. Basic setup here, let's see. We'll go ahead and check for the first thing, which is going to be if the thing that comes over the collider, if the other is actually named player. So we'll say other dot tag equal to player. Again, be sure that you have it capitalized for the player. So if we have our player is actually standing over this, and we can do a quick check. We'll say that if it is the player, and if the player is actually pushing down on either the joystick or pushing down on a key. So we'll say if input dot get axis, and if the axis is vertical, so that means the up and down is less than 0. So if this is meaning, again, the player is actually pushing down on something, then we'll have a quick check. We'll just say print player pushing down. Alright, so we can save this. We can go inside of here real fast, and we'll go ahead and press play on here. So we move the player over and they get on top. If I'm over this box right here and I push down, I actually get the player pushing down right there. Alright, so that lets me know that I'm actually into this area. So go ahead and delete this part. And what we want to do then at this point is actually grab a couple of things. The player itself, once we're over this, then we actually want to make sure we get some player controls. And part of the controls that we're going to need is the velocity of the character, and we'll also need the move direction of the character. So let's go ahead and set up that once the player is actually inside and they're pushing down, then let's make two variables here. We'll grab our velocity x, and we'll make this one, we'll grab the other get component. So we're going to take the player's, we're grabbing the other, which is player, and we're going to get his component, and the component that we want is going to be the player controls. Because at this point we do want to be able to control the player, so we're going to grab player controls, and we'll grab our velocity dot x from this one. Alright, and then we'll take the variable, we want to do the move direction. Again, remember, move direction is which way is he facing. So we'll say move direction, other.getComponent. And again, this is found in the same file, so we'll say player controls. And we could do this differently. We could also just set it one time through and then call it up separately. But we'll go ahead and label these as two different ones. We'll say direction. Alright, so now we have two variables set for two different types. We've got the velocity.x and we have the move direction. Alright, now what we can do at this point, we're going to go ahead and set up two parts for this. We want to make sure that we actually capture which direction he's facing, because if you think about it, when he comes over here and he gets on here, if we're going to port him to the other side, if we don't remember which way he's facing, he may be facing the wrong direction when he comes up here. So we'll go ahead and make sure we're capturing that direction. So we'll go ahead and say that if the move direction is going to be equal to 0, meaning he's looking to the left, or I'll go ahead and place the other one here. If the move direction is going to be equal to 1, which will be facing to the right. Alright, so we have two options there. We'll go ahead and comment on these. We'll come back and comment on all of it here in a little bit, but just so we remember this part, this means that he's going to be, if he's pushing down, he's going to be crouching, and that means he'll be crouching to the left, or he's crouching to the right. Alright, and if he is, then let's go ahead and force his velocity just to equal 0, just so that we're making sure that he's not moving while he's up there. And then we're going to make sure that we have our animation playing for the right direction on this. So we'll do other.getComponent. And we're actually going to grab our animation sprite. And the sprite file, we'll go ahead and actually we're going to set everything to this one statement right here. We'll go ahead and grab our animation function. So we'll say animation sprite function call. And again, we'll just do the 16 by 16. We're calling up our animation sprite sheet. We'll do the 16 by 16, starting on the column at 0 and the row down at 9. And these are just the numbers for calling up his sprite animation for the crouching to the left. So it'll be the 916, and we'll play it at 24 frames a second. Alright, and we'll go ahead and drop a comment on this one. So again, get animation sprite frame for crouching. Alright, same thing for the move direction on the right. We want to do that same type. So again, we'll just grab our, first we'll grab the velocity. We'll set this one to 0 just in case. And then we'll get the other component. Oops. Animation sprite script. And it's going to be the animation sprite function. Set the same thing except for the row will be different. That way we can grab the right row for the right crouching. So it'll be 0, and then we'll have 8 on this one, and then 16 and 24. Alright, so this will give us our component set in place for it. And again, we'll just go ahead and say that the player, let me move this over. We got the animation sprite frame for crouching. And we can say to the right and crouching left. Alright, so now we're actually going to be capturing which direction he's facing, and we're going to make sure that the character is playing the crouch animation, not getting stuck on, like, say, if we walk over and he's standing or he's doing something different. When he comes up and he comes down, we'll be sure that he's actually playing the right direction and the right type of animation for it. Alright, and then the next thing that we want to do, let's go ahead and do one additional thing here, is that once we have this set into place, then let's grab the character's overall component for the player controls and set it to false. When the player walks over here and he starts to push down, we don't want the player to be able to do anything else at that point. We want to freeze the controls, and then we want to actually take control of that and move the character down, move the character up. Alright, so let's go ahead and turn off our controls. So go ahead and try this one if you can think about it by yourself. See if you can figure out how to actually grab the character's component, and the component we're looking for is player controls, and then just turn it off. Alright, see if you can figure that one out. If you can't, you can just follow along here. So if I'm looking for the ability to turn them off, I'm going to do the same thing. I'm just going to say other.getComponent. So again, I have my player's component. What do I want from it? I want the player's script that says for the controls. So if you remember, we'll click on it real fast. Alright, so player controls is right here. So the script that I want is going to be player controls. And then what do I want from this? Again, if I'm trying to turn off the script, I could actually set a function call, and it could be a true-false function just to turn off or turn on this whole thing. Or at the same time, I could just use what's already available to me as the toggle right here. So how do I actually do this one through script? Again, if you remember, we've done something similar to this. We can actually just call up the enable. So on the get component player controls, we'll just do .enabled equals false. If we call that up, that's actually going to turn off the checkbox for this, which means we then have control of the character. Alright, and at that point, if we're thinking about our overall scheme here, we want to move the player down, so we'll just say that move down is going to equal true. Alright, and this part we could go ahead and save, and if we go in here and we play it, we'll go ahead and notice that when let's make sure we have our move direction spelled properly here. So go over here and do the, we'll actually just do, let's see. Here, we'll change the other one. We'll say move, move, and move. Alright. Okay, so when the player walks across, and the player gets on top of this and then pushes down. So notice when I push down, the player goes to the crouch stage, but also notice my keys, I'm actually pushing left and right, and I can't actually do anything. If I look at my player controls, the checkbox was turned off, and then the move down is equal to true becomes available to me. So now I can actually set up some statements for checks on the move down and move up, and then actually do something inside of it. So let's go ahead and do a couple of if statements here. We'll say if move down is true, and while we're doing that one, let's go ahead and set the other one. We'll say if move up is actually true. So we'll check for two types, move down, move up. Both of them currently are set to false. When I get to this point, if the player is over it, the player pushes down on the controls, then move down actually turns to true. Alright, so inside of that, let's go ahead and fill in some code for it. What we want to do is basically take control of the character's translation. We want to move the character down. Now, what we could do is set the gravity to 0. That way we don't have to worry about gravity applying any factor into it. For the move down, since we're not trying to force him up, we'll go ahead and not worry about the gravity at the moment. Let's go ahead and just grab the other, which remember the other is the player. So we'll take the other's transform, and we'll take the translate. Again, the translate will actually be able to move the character up and down, or left and right. For us, we'll go ahead and keep the x left and right at 0. We'll move the player down at -5, and we'll just multiply this one by time delta. Alright, and 0 we'll keep for the z-axis. Alright, so this is going to actually allow us to move the player down based on the time frame for it. And what we want to do with this, let's say we want to move the player down. This is, at this point, hopefully you can kind of just think of this as not necessarily the player, but we're just taking that transform, just the XYZ transform, and we're just moving it where we want to. We have complete control of it. The player can't do anything with it. So as long as we kind of keep that in mind, is that we really have, if we have that type of control, just kind of a side note on this, is that you could also take this as a completely different type of move. We could actually have the player jump up on a wall, and if we wanted the player to jump and grab the wall, well, we could set our, for something like that, we could actually set our gravity to 0, and then we could set the translate to maybe he grabs the wall and he starts to slide down at a different speed. You could set all that within this type of a similar context. Alright, so there's a lot of possibilities. Once we get done with this one, there's a lot of possibilities to do the same type of code and create a lot of different types of moves with it. For the next one, let's say we're going to go ahead and grab our player controls. We're going to get the sound function that we created from it. We could do the sound function inside of here, but just as more practice, there's going to be we're going to get a lot of get components, just so you can get practice at grabbing other stuff from it. So again, let me go ahead and pull this one up so we can see it. On the player controls, we created that function play sound. So let's go ahead and use that one. So inside of here, we'll just do another, we'll say other.getComponent again. And by this time, you should be pretty familiar with getting components and getting other things through even the trigger states. For this one, we'll do the getComponent, and we'll grab our player controls, which is just the player control script right here. The player control script, what we want from it is going to be the play sound function. And remember, there are 2 arguments. We're going to use our sound tube, and the delay amount will be set to 0. Alright, so if we have this, if we were to actually just press save on here, go over here and play it. Actually, make sure we have the let's double check on our tube real fast. Make sure we actually have a sound assigned to it. So on the sound tube, go ahead and just go into your audio file here and look for the Mario sound tube. Should be, let's see, Mario pipe. You can just drag that over to the sound tube. And for that one, when I go over here, so this time when I go over and I jump on this, and then if I push down, you'll notice that it's actually going to move down. If you heard the sound, good. If you couldn't hear the sound, it should be playing on yours. You should be able to hear the sound tube going down. And then he started to move down. So again, if I was to do this again, when I jump, you'll notice that the player moves downward. And you'll notice that now the player actually winds up popping up back here, and he's visible. So this is not part of something we want to actually happen there. So let's try to figure out how to make sure that the character doesn't get seen. And to not get seen, what's the typical thing we want to do? Probably want to take the render state and actually turn off the rendering for it. Alright, but before we do that, let's make sure that we actually wait just a second on the time frame for the sound. So we'll go ahead and just provide a yield for it. Alright, and this one is more of this is just to kind of pause things for just a second. So we'll yield and wait for seconds, just a little split second here. We'll wait for about 0.2 seconds. Alright, and that's going to allow it to make sure that he goes completely down the tube. The sound finishes playing. And once, and this is more, the numbers and stuff is just after I've played around with it for a while. This is kind of just fine tuning it. So we have the wait for seconds, and then we want to go ahead and turn off the render state for the character. So we're going to go to other, render enabled, and we'll just equal it to false. If we do this, then the render state for the player. So let me go ahead and click on player. So the render state, the mesh render, if we turn this off, he won't be seen. So if you notice from right there, I turn it off, he's hidden. So what I want to do is make sure it turns to false. That way if he is inside the scene, he's actually not seen at that moment. Alright. And then we can actually set up our yield time, the wait for seconds. We're going to set this one up for how long it's going to take to go between this portal to the next portal. So if you remember on our variables up here, we have the time to port. So we'll say yield, wait for seconds, and it's going to be the time to port. Alright, so that's going to allow us to set how long it'll take to get to the other side. And the last thing that we want to do, let's go ahead and take when he goes down. So just kind of think through the process here. The player jumps, he pushes down. That's going to move the player. So for instance right here, this moves the player down. We're going to take 0.2 seconds, just a fraction of a second, to actually move him down. Once he's down, we're going to turn off the rendering, because if you notice, he gets seen at some points, and we want to make sure he never actually gets seen. And then right after that, we're going to give a little bit of a delay. That way we don't just jump over to the other one and start to move him up. Okay, and then after we've waited for that part, then let's actually just move him to his new position. So we could say the other transform dot position. Okay, so the other character's transform position is going to equal our tube portal 2. All right, so it's going to be equal to our tube portal 2, and the 2 is going to be the transform position. Alright, so what did we just do? We created the character's position, his XYZ position, and it's going to be equal to the other position of our portal 2, meaning that this one, for instance right here, this object on this one, if we were to take this guy, so say for instance we take this one and it says to portal 2, so which one are we going to port to? We're going to take the other one and set it up as the transform to move to. Alright, so that means it's going to go from here all the way over to here. Alright, so if it moves it over to that one, then we can say that, well, once you move over to this one, we can start moving the player back up. Alright, now if we were to save this for the moment, say for instance we go over here and we play it, now if you're reading through the code, what's going to happen? And the player is going to walk over, we can push jump, we can go down. The player is going to move over there to it. So notice, we see where it stops, it waits for that, see, time port, which was 2 seconds. So it waits that 2 seconds, it moves over to here. The player is actually still hidden in terms of the render state, so we're not able to actually see the player. If we want to actually see the player, then let's make sure we go over here and render the player back visible again, and we also have to make sure we give the controls back to the player. Alright, so for the move up, this is going to be where we actually had to change things to go back to true again and set things to actually happen again. In order to make sure we can move up on this last part of our statement here, let's set our move down to false. That way we're no longer inside of here, and we'll set our move up to true. So once we're for sure the character's been moved to the right location, he's no longer rendering, we set move down to false, move up to true, and then inside of move to true, the move up, once it sets to true, this is where we can actually set things to start moving up on the character. We can give the controls back to the character. So move up. Let's start off by saying yield. We're going to wait for just a second once we start to move them up. So the whole process itself is going to have several yield statements. This one is so that once the character moves over, we're going to give it just a second to wait before we actually move the player up the tube. Alright, and after that, let's go ahead and take the sound. So if you remember, the sound moves down. Once he moves down, he gets a sound effect. And when he starts to move up, he gets a sound effect as well. Alright, so, make sure we spell this right. So let's go ahead and grab our sound again. We'll say other.getComponent. Now again, we could have just set these one time. We could have set it up at the very top and just made a single call to it. But you can also just call directly to it from here as well. Is this the best practice? Probably not. But it's good practice just to be able to get used to the fact that you can just grab a script, you can grab a function inside, and you can use it. Alright, so we'll say player controls dot play sound, and inside of this will be again our sound tube, and we'll play the delay amount at 0. Alright, So we have our first other component that we're grabbing, and then we also want to grab another thing. When we start moving the player up, we don't want to really be forced to try to have to contend with the gravity that's placing, because like right now our gravity is set to 20 going down. So we want to turn our gravity off. So we'll just go in here and we'll say get component, and the get component we're going to get is going to be from the player controls again. But what we want is the gravity. So we're going to say gravity and make it equal to 0. And by doing that, we're going to kind of ensure that we don't have to worry about when we move the player up. We don't have to like put in a ridiculous number to get the player actually above the ground. So we'll say gravity is going to be equal to 0. And we'll do one other. We'll go ahead and set his render state again to true. Alright. Now at this point, we could actually save this, and if we were to go in here and play, alright, once the player gets into the scene, we could go over to the side and we could push down. And when we push down, we'll go angle it over here so you can see it. You can see that he's actually behind here. He's at the XYZ location of the other box down at this point. Alright, so now we want to be able to move the player up inside of it. And in order to move the player up, let's go ahead and just go to his other and transform, and then translate it up. So other, and we'll just go to the transform of that object, and we'll go to the translate for it. And for the translate, again, this is just going to need 3 coordinates, the x, y, and z. We don't care about moving him to the left or right, we just want to move him up. So we'll take him at about a speed of 4 and multiply this by time.delta time. Alright, and we'll go with 0 on this one. Now, the speed at which he comes up, you could actually set that to a variable inside the inspector. That way, in case you want to like throw him up, so instead of like he just comes up slightly, maybe you want to toss him way up into the air and then come back down. Well, those could be a variable set specifically for a certain case, and you can make that set for the inspector side. Alright, so if we have those, we'll go ahead and check on how this one works. So let's go ahead and save this. And if we play it, so we'll move our character over, we'll have him go down, and he's going to go down for a second, then he's going to reappear, and notice, do you see how he reappears? He just jumps straight up to here, and his controls are still off and the gravity's off, so he gets to this point, and he just stays right there. So we have moved him up. So the next thing that we want to do after we've moved him up is, let's go ahead and go into here. Let's give it just a little bit of a yield. We want to wait just a little bit before we actually turn everything back on in terms of the gravity. If we turn the gravity on instantly, then it's just going to go, it's going to be more of a jerk type of state, transition instead of a smoother transition. So we'll do just a wait for seconds here. And again, just a little bit of a wait. We'll just do like a 0.3 for a wait. Alright. So that'll allow the player to move up just a little bit, and then we turn the gravity back on. So again, gravity, we haven't set this as to a specific variable. So if we wanted to call it up again, we could just do other and get component. And we're grabbing our player control script. By the end of this, you should be pretty comfortable with just grabbing a script file and grabbing functions and variables from it and assigning different amounts to it if you need to assign them, or changing or calling up things. Hopefully you'll start to get used to that. Again, like we've talked about before, the gravity, I'm setting it to a specific number. However, the more probable method for this, the better method, would actually be to call up either a global variable or to call a specific variable with that with the right value for it. That way, if you change it once, it's going to be changed throughout your script, not just in that one spot. Alright, so again, we have our component. Now we're going to be able to have the player go back down, but we also want to add the movement back. So if you remember, in order to turn the movement on, we'll just go and get the component for it. So movement is part of the player controls script. And in order to turn that script back on, remember up on the top part here, we had the player controls enabled equals false. So now we're going to do enabled equals true. and that's going to give control back to the player. Alright, and then after that point, let's go ahead and just set our move up to false. So once we've done all the things we need to do inside of here, then we can turn it back to false. We'll save it, we'll go back into Unity, and when we play this time around, alright, so we'll walk him over here, we'll do our jump, and when the player pushes down, he'll go down, then 2 seconds later, he'll come back up, and notice he comes up smooth. I don't know if it's recording smooth or not, but he'll come up smooth, and he stops right at the base of this one. Okay, so now if we wanted to make it a tube that just goes back and forth on both sides, we could actually click on this guy, and his tube portal on this one. Here, let's actually set this to, for this first one, if I go ahead and just do apply, that way when I come into here, if I've done the apply on that one, we can click on the item tube here and do a revert. And we'll double check. That should have assigned it. Yeah, so it assigns for the Mario pipe on this part. Now, there's no tube option for this one yet. What we want to do is actually grab this one and assign it to the port 2. That means that right here, this one is going to take you to here, and then this one will take you over to this spot. Alright, so that kind of gives us a nice looping cycle right through there, which means I can go to either one. Alright, so we can go to this one and drop down into it, and once it comes up, he comes up to this side, and then I can go down into this one and come up into that one. Alright, so that gives us our basic element for our tube porting. It allows us to go back and forth between the two. The only thing left just to kind of talk about on this is that we still haven't written in terms of like specific rules. Like for instance, if the player goes into this, can he go back up the same one? Can he go down the same one more than one time? That part you could just very easily add into the spawn 2 points. You can add it into here and just write rules for the moving up and moving down. It can be more than just one check. So if it was checking for moving down and he had only moved down maybe one time into it, or he can only move down one time into it, so it would just be checking for an additional option there. Alright. So that gives us all of our spawn 2 points. Last thing we'll do is just add the comments to the code right here. Alright. For this we'll just say we're going to be checking for if collision occurs. And for the next one, if the tag name is equal to player, controls are pushed down. Alright, and then for this, we're just going to be checking for just setting the velocity x to the values of the player's actual movement. So we'll just say set x to player's current x movement. And that would be referring to our left and right movement, or to the horizontal, either way. This one, move direction. Let's go ahead and move this over once. Alright, so the move direction, this is going to be setting move direction to the player's actual current move direction. And something just to kind of take note of on that one, again, if we were back inside of here, when we were on this one, if I turned my player this direction and moved down, when the player comes up, he'll be facing to the right. Oh, there we go. And when you'll probably notice, you see how I went into this area. When recording, sometimes if there's a lot happening in the scene, there's sometimes issues with that. If it's running at regular frame rate, there's no issues with it. Alright, so let's go ahead and jump back into this one. And that could be something you check into and look into later. Alright, so set movement to 0. Same thing on this one. Alright, for this one, we're just simply stating that we're turning off player controls, and we'll say enable move down for player. Check for move down true. Alright, and let's make this a little bit wider here. Okay, so for these, actually I'm just going to go ahead and let's just pretty this up a little bit more here. Okay, we'll keep going with this. So for the move down, we're basically on this one, we're just going to take the player and move the player down on the y-axis here. So say move player down the tube on the y-axis. Alright, and then we'll play sound. And let's make a comment here is that we're playing sound from the player controls function sound. Alright, and for the first wait that we have here, we're just going to make sure that the player makes it down the tube. So we'll say wait till player makes it down the tube. And then after that point, so again, if we take the rendering and we turn it to false immediately, that means that the moment the player pushes down, he just disappears. But if we wait for that fraction of a second, he'll actually move down the tube and then disappear. Alright, so then we'll turn off the rendering of the mesh, or we'll just say of the sprite. Alright, and this is going to be time to port to the other side. Alright, then we're going to move our player from his position to the port position. At that point, our statement for the moving down is complete, which means we can turn our the move down off. So we'll say turn move down off, and we'll enable move up. So again, if this is just going to be a check for moving up, and if it's true, then let's hold off for just 1 second, make sure that everything's set in place, the characters move to the right spot. So we'll just wait for 1 second before moving the player. Just to be sure. Okay, now once we've moved the player over, again we're going to be playing our sound from the other file. So we'll take play sound from the player controls sound function, and like I said before, we could have just placed that same function inside of here and played it through this one. We're just again, it's just to show that you can very easily get your component, get your script, and call up your function and set your variables inside. For this one, we're going to turn off the gravity. So this one, turning off gravity so the player can move up smoothly. Alright, that way we're not trying to fight the gravity as we move up. And as the player, so for this one, we're going to turn the rendering state back on, which means, like we had before, he was squatted from behind there. So the render state, turn rendering back on, and begin moving player up the tube. Alright, and as it moves up the tube, we'll wait till the player moves up before we actually turn the gravity back on. And we'll just make a comment here that default is 20, because that's what we've set it to from the very beginning. Alright, and then the other option after that point is to turn the controls back on for the player to be able to move. So we'll just say that at this point, let's make sure we kind of say it the same way we said it for the one up here. Turning off player controls, we'll say enable player controls. And then finally, once we've done all of those, we can then turn move up off. Alright. So that allows us to have the comments inside of this one, and we've basically got a pretty nice working script for the tube portaling, being able to go back and forth between the 2 points there.